The way he leaps off of rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen. It gives me goosebumps every time he does it, especially as the music begins to swell.
I have been a fan of superheroes most of my life. I think they're an interesting modernization of the myths of the past and the closest thing we have to ancient stories of the gods that nearly every culture has in some forms. Superman, who was created during the Great Depression, was designed to be a modernization of these gods, and not unlike the gods of ancient times, many of these characters began to transcend the original stories and look to new forms and mythologies that allowed them to shine beyond their original forms in which the stories have been told. In this modern world, these icons have also transcended their original medium of comic books into radio, and then to theater, eventually TV, and with the advent of the home gaming scene, these characters began to eventually transcend into that medium as well. And while Superman is much more like Zeus, the champion of gods and man, when Steve Ditko and Stan Lee created Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy 15 back in 1962, they figured they would create a champion closer to the people who the characters are written for, an everyman. Peter Parker, or Spider-Man, would go on to be a widely popular character, due in part to being relatively average and figuring out the hero stuff along the way, eventually catching up with and arguably surpassing other heroes who had a couple decades head start on him, like Batman and Superman, by delving deeper into the teenage and child audience that he was created for, also allowing great tragedies to enter his life, unlike many of his contemporary heroes. Spider-Man was allowed to grow up eventually, and that showed that Peter had as many problems as an adult as he did as a teen, and despite this, he was still a beacon for good in his home city of New York. Years later, Marvel would reboot the character with Ultimate Comics Spider-Man, which was meant to reflect the popular Spider-Man film directed by Sam Raimi, which had just come to theaters. Ultimate Comics was successful and well written. The issue was that the characters started to feel closer to the character from the primary continuity, so it was time for a change. So in Ultimate Fallout number 4 in 2011, Brian Michael Bendis, the creative writer behind the entire Ultimate run, teamed up with Sarah Pinzolini to create the reimagined Spider-Man, and thus Miles Morales was created, with him not only having many similar teenage issues to his predecessor, but also had several twists on the Spider-Man formula. Eventually, during the Secret Wars event, Marvel realized it was time for the Ultimate Universe to disband, but couldn't leave behind its most popular creation, so they brought Miles over to the main universe. And ever since, we've had the iconic pair of Spider-Men, which would be the basis for Insomniac's Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man, of course, has a rich history in video games, with the character appearing in tons of games on tons of gaming consoles, from games where he teamed up with other characters in the Marvel Universe to solo games. His first appearance was on the Atari 2600, and of course most recently he's had his spotlight in the PlayStation exclusive game series. Spider-Man has also had a successful history, with the PS1 Spider-Man game and Spider-Man 2 for PS2 being cult classics in some circles. And games like Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions directly influenced the comics, like Spider-Verse, which directly influenced the Spider-Verse movie, which in turn popularized the Miles character enough into mainstream consciousness and making him an iconic and lasting part of the Spider-Man myth, and probably a big reason Insomniac elected to add him to the game in a major role. Spider-Man has always been a character that has hopped between mediums and brought new things between each medium. That is one thing I've always liked about these multimedia characters. Creatives of all kinds add new things to the core story and legend, expanding the general myth. Insomniac, for their part, started developing these games in partnership with Sony and Marvel, with the first game dropping in 2018, but they are also a prestigious studio in their own right, who released their first game in 1996, but eventually made popular and well-made games like Spyro, Ratchet & Clank, and Sunset Overdrive. They primarily worked with PlayStation, but dabbled in working with Microsoft with the aforementioned Sunset Overdrive, before being acquired by Sony themselves and being folded into the PlayStation family of games. These Insomniac games were also the first mainline Spider-Man games in a number of years that weren't produced multi-platform by Activision, which created the series of games, including most of the famous movie tie-ins, Ultimate Spider-Man, Shattered Dimensions, and more. A lot of these games were decent, if a little bit jank, and some of them had a similar style to what Insomniac ended up doing and eventually polishing. Insomniac definitely took the formula and ran with it. I have a long personal history with Spider-Man. Before I was a comic book, video game, movie geek, I was a Spider-Man fanatic growing up, starting off with the Raimi films and eventually getting into the comics medium in part because of the Marvel Age line of comics that were available at Target during the early 2000s, in the magazine aisle with magazine styling and format. I distinctly remember the shelf itself was sitting across from the PC games, which was a notable distance away from the console games in the early 2000s for some reason. Anyways, Spider-Man, in a lot of ways, was a great gateway drug for me into numerous mediums. So it was only natural that I bought a lot of these Activision games and eventually pre-ordered Insomniac's first Spider-Man game in 2018 at a time when my depression was pretty bad and I ended up moving to my mom's house in Las Vegas, which, as it turns out, is very hard to find work with no skills and a lot of competition. But regardless, I had a lot of time to immerse myself into the world of that first Spider-Man in 2018, and I fell in love with the world. It had flaws for sure, what game doesn't, but it had fun, snappy gameplay and felt like a substantial step forward when compared to the Activision Spider-Man games, as well as sort of a successor to Rocksteady's Arkham games, which ended just a few years earlier. It filled the void those games left and gave me a new superhero game franchise to look forward to. And in a lot of ways, they expanded upon those other games with newfound techniques and new technology. I was able to blast through the Miles Morales midquel pretty quickly as well, since that was more like a larger DLC than an actual sequel, hence the game not being called Spider-Man 2. I have lots I could say about both of these games, and I might go back to those games sooner or later, so I will probably forgo much more introduction on this game, besides saying that after a relatively long wait between main series games, 5 years after the original, Insomniac finally released the successor to his ultra-popular Spider-Man game with, well, Spider-Man 2.
Let's begin now.
Spider-Man 2 takes place after the first game and the Miles expansion, with Miles and Peter protecting New York together. Harry Osborn returns to town as well, and things seem to be coming together for Peter. However, being Spider-Man seems to always come first, and this continues to cause issues for Peter, especially in his love life with Mary Jane. Meanwhile, a new threat enters New York when Kraven the Hunter comes to town and starts hunting supervillains. Kraven seems to be a huge threat for the Spider-Men, but thankfully they get help from Harry Osborn, who ended up with his own superpowers after combining with the Venom symbiote. This is short-lived, however, because when the group confronts Kraven, Peter is wounded, and the symbiote attaches to him. Peter becomes more vengeful after this, and eventually, Miles is captured by Kraven in order to lure in Peter. Peter defeats Kraven. However, despite being saved by Peter, Miles can tell that Peter is beginning to lose himself. Ultimately, Kraven escapes, and Miles manages to save Peter from the Venom symbiote. Peter goes to talk to Harry, whose health has diminished since being disconnected from the symbiote, and after a container holding the symbiote is smashed, Harry combines with the Venom, and this time is fully embraced. Venom meets with Kraven, who he kills with relative ease, and the biggest threat of the game is revealed. Venom starts to rip up the city, growing symbiote hives, making the people of New York and even Mary Jane at one point his soldiers, with the hope of eventually taking over the entire world. Peter knows he has to stop this by any cost, but Dr. Connors, or the Lizard, warns that destroying Venom may also kill Harry, as he is deeply linked to the creature at this point. Mary Jane, Peter, and Miles run into battle with Venom and the other symbiotes, with Mary Jane and Miles going after the meteorite that brought the Venom to Earth, which, if destroyed, can slow down the invasion, and with Peter going after Harry, who he hopes to free from Venom. After a battle with Venom, Peter and Miles ultimately defeat him, saving New York. Miles manages to save Harry, but he's trapped in a coma with little brain activity, and Norman vows revenge on Spider-Man, who he sees as responsible for Harry's condition.
I want you to kill Peter Parker.
Spider-Man 2 came out after two very successful predecessors, these being Spider-Man and its spin-off, Spider-Man Miles Morales, which acted as a midquel bridging the two series. The game had teases in both games, making a pretty well sure thing. Spider-Man has always done pretty well in video games, and with the combined might of Sony and Marvel backing Insomniac's effort, and an expanded interest on characters like Spider-Man and Venom with the wild success of the MCU, and Sony putting lots of resources towards their various Spider-Man films,
Please. Please.
it was a pretty safe bet on Insomniac's part to tease Spider-Man 2 even back in 2018. Insomniac scored the keys to helm one of the largest characters in the largest American media franchises. On top of that, they were positioned by PlayStation to be a major exclusive, intended to stand along with other PlayStation system sellers like God of War or The Last of Us. While we know this game was coming, Insomniac was not shy about hinting on the future of Peter, explaining the Miles Morales spin-off was an expansion to the world and its lore, but not an inherent replacement for Peter or his story. Finally, we got confirmation on the matter at Sony's PlayStation event in September of 2021, when it was revealed that Insomniac was creating a second Spider-Man game along with a new Wolverine game that was to be developed concurrently with Spider-Man 2. Though it isn't immediately clear if Wolverine will connect to Spider-Man or if this game world would be an open world game or more of a linear one, it is safe to assume the game will be an action game in a similar vein to Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise. The goal of Spider-Man 2 was to make a darker game overall when compared to the original game, with Bill Roseman, the VP of Marvel Games, comparing Spider-Man to the original Star Wars and the sequel to Empire Strikes Back. The game would become successful even more in the pre-order circuit, with the game getting gold around a month before its release. Unlike music, though, which has hard numbers for sales goals, games are on a sliding scale based on budget and other factors. But based on the budget and my understanding, I would say that it's around 250,000 units a month before release. At the time of writing this, it has sold 2.5 million copies. That means it's officially the fastest selling PlayStation game of all time, along with being nominated for Game of the Year awards, and going against a pretty strong competition with Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Super Mario Wonder, and Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom being its competition. I've only played Mario Wonder and Zelda other than this, but that's pretty steep competition because I've only heard good things about the other 3 competitors I've yet to try.
And the game of the year is Baldur's Gate 3.
This is my favorite part of making videos based on comic book characters, where I talk about characters who appear in the game, or movie or whatever, and where they originated, how the character's been expanded and changed from one medium to another, and so on. Spider-Man 2 has a fairly large cast naturally, with the 2 Spider-Mans being our tentpole playable characters, but a pretty decisive roster of side characters also appearing, with a couple that have moments that were playable during the duration of the story mode. Peter Parker is the original Spider-Man in this game, who first appeared in Amazing Fantasy 15, written by Stan Lee and with art by Steve Ditko, with the character remaining a popular tentpole in the Marvel Universe and leading the Spider-Man line of comics as its primary lead. Throughout his history in the comics, Spider-Man has gone through several retcons and reimagining, meaning Marvel, who has never gone through a hard reboot in its 80-plus years of production, needs to do some convoluted shit to retcon or ignore aspects of past continuity fans don't like. This means it's hard to place Peter exactly, but throughout his history, unlike Batman who constantly evolves, Peter has a series of core philosophies and ideas that carry through. The Peter in the Insomniac games is a post-college Peter who struggles to hold a job while also being Spider-Man. This allows him to hold more adult relationships with Mary Jane, and also, since he has a fairly long history as Spider-Man in this universe, it makes him mentoring and being kind of a big brother to Miles work more. He isn't a one-for-one adaptation from the comic version because as much as I love comic Peter, several storylines have made the primary 616 continuity kind of a total mess, frankly. Writer to writer, the status quo changes to the point where we don't have a super concise Peter in that timeline anymore. This Peter is more simple, standardized Peter. He has a loving yet difficult relationship with Mary Jane. His aunt and uncle who acted as his parents and raised him from a young age have both passed away. Miles is his younger protege, being the only person who truly understands him. He has a big rogues gallery and the city knows him. J. Jonah Jameson hates him as Spider-Man. He has a troubled job history, but through it all he works hard at being Spider-Man and protecting the city he loves at all costs, putting it above everything else. Insomniac did a good job of giving the character a long history without many convolutions. It feels more natural than the comics, though they definitely did a good job of adapting the character despite this. This isn't really a knock on the comics. I'm a big fan of the mainstream comics, but Peter popping up with multiple books based on him, plus guest starring in several issues a month, it is bound to be a little confusing at points. That's kind of the double-edged sword of that medium. That isn't so much an issue in the game series that can take a number of years to knock out each installment. Miles Morales is the other featured Spider-Man in the game, with his character first appearing in Ultimate Fallout number 4 from 2011. Not unlike the original Spider-Man, Miles has had a fairly convoluted history. Starting in the Ultimate Universe, or Earth 1610, Miles was the successor of Peter Parker of that world, who perished fighting the Green Goblin. He gained his powers shortly before Peter's death, but ultimately decided, due to there already being a Spider-Man, to suppress his powers and leave the heroism up to the real Spider-Man. This changed after Spider-Man was killed, and Miles was overcome with guilt, feeling he could have helped, and that the world needed a Spider-Man, so he took up the mantle, inheriting Peter's foes and finding some new ones along the way. Another major twist is that while Peter's uncle was a role model to Peter, Miles also had an impactful uncle, Uncle Aaron, but Aaron had his own secret, and that was that he's the supervillain Prowler. This gave Miles something to feel genuinely conflicted about. He looked up to Aaron, but it turns out he was a villain. In the Spider-Man comic books, Spider-Man from the primary 616 continuity meets Miles. This led Miles to feel some closure from the death of the Peter of his world, and would mark the first time the two Spider-Men met in person. Later, in the 2015 Secret Wars comic event, which acted as a light sequel to the 80s comic where Peter got his black suit originally, Miles was folded into the main Marvel 616 universe, and Miles became Peter's protege, with him and his family moving to the main Marvel universe and the Ultimate Universe being erased. I didn't love when Miles came to the main Marvel universe because it causes an issue with the character that I think kind of removes his primary purpose. As a character, Miles is an everyman like Peter, but with a twist with his ties to African American and Latin American culture. Being a teenager like Peter makes it even harder for him to navigate early superhero life, and he feels pretty alone in the world, as a crime fighter at least. He doesn't have the same alliances Ultimate Peter made over time. He isn't a sidekick, just a guy who had to figure out how to navigate the world in this new Spider-Man identity. With the world also seeing Peter's sacrifice and seeing him as a noble kid who just wanted to do right and died protecting his neighborhood. And with the reader following this Peter for over 100 issues before Miles was created, had both the people of the city and the readers wondering at the time, who was this kid and why does he think he can be Spider-Man?
Can you be strong? Ruthless? Disciplined?
I don't know. Maybe.
Sidekick?
soldier.
Above all, no matter how many times you get hit, can you get back up?
Ultimate Spider-Man was also one of my favorite comic series while it was coming out, with me owning the entire run in trades and most of it in singles. I admit I wasn't sold on Miles right away, and losing Peter, even if it wasn't the main universe Peter, hurt. By the end of Miles' time in the Ultimate Universe, I think he proved himself as a great character who earns the title of Spider-Man, and who still had a long way to go, but was ultimately a guy who carried the mantle with pride. It didn't hurt that Brian Michael Bendis wrote both iterations of Ultimate Comics, spearheading Peter and Miles' entire runs within that universe. All this to explain some background on why I hated having him pulled into the main universe. Now Miles felt like Peter's sidekick. He has Peter to tell him how to be Spider-Man, and ultimately, as much as we may enjoy Miles as a character, to me and you and everyone else, he will always be in Peter's shadow now. Due to the game series not wanting to abandon Peter or his arc, Miles and Peter are together in this game, and while he still has strong moments, unfortunately it was impossible for Insomniac to have its cake and eat it too. If you want Miles and Peter in the same universe, both active at the same time, they have to coexist. This is a little bittersweet, especially since we don't get to see much solo Miles in media anymore. Miles in the animated movie is often flanked by other Spideys, and in this game, Miles always has Peter as a crutch. Man, the run was short for Miles in the Ultimate Universe, but that was some good shit. Read the entirety of Ultimate Spider-Man from issue 1 up until Peter moves to the main 616 continuity, and if you're dry-eyed for the entirety of the 200-ish issues, I commend you. That said, Insomniac did a good job adapting the character, and it's unlikely we'll see anything that's similar to that original Miles comic run as much as I'd love to. Aaron Davis, or the Prowler, appears in a series of side missions in this game. He first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man number 1 in 2011. The original Prowler, Hobby Brown, appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 78 from 1969. Regardless, Aaron in this game primarily appears in a series of side missions by voice call. I won't go much into his missions yet, or his character arc from the Miles game, because I may do a full review of that game one day, so hang tight on that. But in this game, Aaron is a reformed criminal, the Prowler, who after years of doing his thing as the Prowler was arrested and is now on parole. He directs Miles to his Prowler gear stashes hidden throughout the city, which will gain some upgrades for the pair of Spider-Men. Curt Connors, or the Lizard, first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 6 and was one of Spider-Man's earliest foes. In this game, he's reformed from the Lizard persona, but after Kraven and the Hunters infiltrate New York, Curt Connors becomes the Lizard again. In the game and the comics, Curt Connors is very much a Jekyll and Hyde style character who's essentially an innocent scientist who will work with Peter one moment, and after some experimentation becomes the mutant Lizard with evil compulsions.
Brilliant scientist, until he turned himself into a lizard. Then he tried to turn the whole city into lizards. It was crazy.
Felicia Hardy, or Black Cat, is essentially Marvel's answer to Catwoman. She first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 194 from 1979. In this game, she appears in a mission being hunted by the Hunters. Much like in the comics, Black Cat lies somewhere between friend and foe.
Spider-Man, friend or foe? You won't believe who's on your side. Rated everyone 10 and up.
This game, she mainly interacts with Miles and hopes to find her girlfriend in Paris. She manages at one point to steal a device from the Sanctum Sanctorium that allows her to teleport to Paris. I thought this was a pretty fun little moment because it expands the Marvel Universe a bit, and it's nice to see Black Cat back for a little bit. Flint Marko, or the Sandman, appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 4 from 1963 and was another instant classic character in Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery. In the comics, Flint Marko is a made-up name to make him sound tougher, with William Baker being his real name. Most continuities just call him Flint Marko, though, and is the first villain to be encountered by Kraven, who makes Marko relapse into being the Sandman after targeting Flint. On top of this, his daughter goes missing. This causes him to go on a massive rampage through the city. His daughter is kind of a new addition to the comics, first appearing in 2009, and the general plot line, being pulled mostly from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, was Sandman acting a villain with occasional heroic dabbling. That is the biggest difference between the games and the majority of Flint's comic history. With that said, I think the daughter plotline works well here, and with him trying to reform and kind of being a big open game battle scene allows for a pretty good introduction to the game, and unraveling the mystery of what set Flint off is pretty interesting throughout the runtime of this game. Genki first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man number 2 from 2011. He is essentially Miles' tech guy and confidant who Miles works with closely. Another character made fairly irrelevant when transferred to the main comics universe, Genki in the games is now the kind of the tech guy for both Spider-Men, which I like. Genki is also definitely the basis for Ned Leeds in the MCU. He kind of takes the place Yuri did in the original game, being sort of the tech guy and a good way to get some exposition out while you're doing some city swinging. Harry Osborn first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 31 from 1965 and is a character with a long and convoluted history in the comics. The character is deceased in the comics, but was cloned, and that clone was the main Harry in the comics for around 15 years before also dying, which freed the original Harry Osborn's soul from hell. In other words, Harry is another slightly convoluted Spider-Man character. In the game, Harry is best friends with Spider-Man, not too dissimilarly from most interpretations. However, this version of the character becomes Venom. At first, one more similar to Agent Venom from when Flash Thompson had the symbiote, before eventually becoming a version more akin to Mac Gargan or Eddie Brock's version of the character. Tombstone first appears in The Web of Spider-Man 36 from 1987, and in this game he's a reformed criminal that is being hunted by Kraven, who is looking to start a peaceful life after turning his back to crime. The comic doesn't really have this arc ever for the character, however I think it's a good choice because it shows that Kraven doesn't really care about anything but the thrill of the hunt and proving himself to be kind of the ultimate hunter. He is neither a hero nor a villain, he's just a guy trying to move on in life, but Kraven is hunting him anyways. I half expected a rug pull where Tombstone would flip on Spider-Man, but he didn't, which I kind of appreciate. It shows Spider-Man can save villains in the same way he saves civilians, and it's a pretty decent little moment. Mr. Negative first appeared in Free Comic Book Day 2007 Spider-Man number 1 from 2007. That's a mouthful of a comic title. And is one of the few key characters made for a Free Comic Book Day book. Anyways, Mr. Negative was the villain of the first Spider-Man PS4 game, and he is captured by Kraven and sent out to fight Miles, who has a personal vendetta against Lee since Miles' father was indirectly killed by Lee during his rampage at the end of Spider-Man PS4. Eventually, Miles and Mr. Negative team up to give Peter the anti-venom symbiote suit, which allows him to better fight Harry at the end of the game. Mary Jane Watson is Spider-Man's girlfriend in this game. In the comics, she started cameoing in Amazing Spider-Man 25 in 1965, before finally being revealed in Amazing Spider-Man 42 in 1966. Mary Jane has been a steady player in the comics, occasionally being Spider-Man's girlfriend, wife, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It'll be retconned soon after this anyways. Mary Jane was notable for being one of Spider-Man's most iconic love interests, up there with the deceased Gwen Stacy, so it's a pretty natural choice to have her be the main love interest and confidant to Peter in this game. She's also one of the few characters you get an opportunity to play as, albeit in brief stealth missions throughout the game's runtime. Norman Osborn first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 14 in 1964 as the mysterious villain Green Goblin before first appearing outside of the suit in Amazing Spider-Man 23, and finally being revealed as the Green Goblin to readers in Amazing Spider-Man number 39 in 1966, a little over 2 years after he was first introduced. Stan Lee really liked to make mysteries in the early Spider-Man comics, so it's occasionally annoying, but it gets the job done. Quentin Beck, or Mysterio, first appears in Amazing Spider-Man issue 2 from 1963 as an unnamed apprentice to the Tinkerer before being revealed as Mysterio in Amazing Spider-Man 13 from 1964. Much like Tombstone, Quentin Beck is now reformed when a couple of shady characters take over the Mysterio mantle and Quentin Beck is held hostage. Rio Morales is the mother of Miles Morales and first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man number 1 from 2011. In the comics, Rio was transferred from the Ultimate Universe to the current Marvel Universe along with Gonki and Miles. In the comics, her husband Jefferson Davis is alive, however in the game Jefferson died during the fight against Mr. Negative. Miles' family traditionally goes through random characters being dead. It's pretty inconsistent between each timeline for some reason. Yuri first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 600 in 2009 before she became Wraith in Amazing Spider-Man 663 from 2011. In this game, she was her Wraith identity, which I think had some good use for the character. She was essential to the original Spider-Man PS4 game, but probably wouldn't have as much to do in this game, with Gonki being added to the main cast as Spider-Man's new ear to the streets. In this game, she wants vengeance following the events of the City That Never Sleeps DLC from Spider-Man PS4 and takes up the identity of the Wraith during the side mission with the Flame Cult. Yuri has gotten a bit more brutal when teaming up with Spider-Man in those Flame missions. Spider-Man was forced to kind of hold her back a bit. I admit I never played that DLC for Spider-Man PS4. I beat the game after only a few days and had already moved on to different things and missed the release till much later. I do plan on rebeating the game and playing the DLC, perhaps for a potential feature video or just for fun. I don't know yet, but it's on my list. Betsy Snyder is one half of the team behind the Mysterio subplot within this game. Betsy first appeared in Web Spinner's Tales of Spider-Man number 1 from 1998, but was never a major character or antagonist in the comics, just being a former fling of Quentin Beck that briefly appears in a couple issues. Cole Whitman is the other half of the Mysterio team, first appearing in Fantastic Four number 514 from 2004. She was the daughter of the Wizard and Salamandra. They really went for the deep cuts for this side mission. I at least kind of get Betsy Schneider and why she was added to the role, but Cole Whitman was a total asspull. I feel like they just hit the random button on Marvel's Wikaya, and yes, I'm using the Marvel Wiki as a crutch. I know most of these characters being a Spider-Man fan, but I don't care if you read every single Spider-Man comic and had a photographic memory. I don't think anyone watching this knew who Betsy Snyder or Cole Whitman was. I'm not one of those YouTubers who sees Betsy Snyder and says, oh yes, Betsy Snyder. Her total 6 panels in the history of Marvel Comics were some of my favorites from the very first issue of the Spider-Man spin-off series Web Spinner's Tale of Spider-Man. I wonder if Mark Waid, Cole Whitman's creator, got like a 3-cent royalty check from the use of the character in this game. Cletus Cassidy is most well known for being Carnage in the comics, but in the game we never actually see him transform, with only a tease in the game for his future potential within the franchise. Cletus first appears in Amazing Spider-Man 344 from 1990 before taking on the Carnage identity in Amazing Spider-Man 360 from 1992. In the comics, he's a serial killer and general terrible psycho who gets the symbiote and starts causing issues for both Venom as well as Spider-Man. In the game, Cletus leads a cult called the Flame and gains access to the symbiote at the end of the Flame DLC, which will probably come back either in a potential sequel or the DLC for this game. Scream appears in this game as well, who's another famous symbiote that infects Mary Jane. In the comics, Donna Diego has the Scream identity for most of the time and originally appeared in 1994's Venom Lethal Protector number 4. In the comics, she bears a passing resemblance to Mary Jane, so seeing MJ take on the identity instead of Donna isn't all that surprising, and I think thematically it works for the game. I don't think for a quick flash-in-the-pan encounter with Scream we really needed to bother introducing Donna and figuring all that stuff out to waste more time. Plus, if they really want, they can probably still introduce her in a DLC, which if you guys want me to do a review of the DLC stories as well, let me know down below. If the DLC is out and I haven't reviewed it yet, shoot a comment and I'll hop right to it. I probably just forgot. Or I have since passed away, in which case someone else can do it. If you thought Kraven the Hunter wasn't going to be a convoluted story in the comics, you would be wrong. Kraven is another early Spider-Man villain, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 15 from 1964, and cementing himself as a recurring villain. Though not as popular as the likes of Green Goblin or Doc Ock, Kraven was the antagonist of arguably the best Spider-Man comic arc of all time, Kraven's Last Hunt by J.M. DeMatteis and Mike Zeck. In the story, Kraven takes up the Spider-Man identity, and then the story ends with Kraven taking his own life. Kraven was revived, because that happens in comics, and he was kicking around the Marvel Universe for a while before dying once again, this time equipping his son with a Kraven name. His son looks exactly like him, and is also now Kraven the Hunter. He has not had his true name revealed yet, and it's probably just going to be a soft revival of the character. Mainland Marvel Comics is the most convoluted shit ever, and Kraven the Hunter doesn't go out of this unscathed. In the game, he's hunting a lot of villains, and it's pretty true to his character, even if we don't ever really get a ton of in-depth explanation on the character of Kraven. Venom has went through numerous hosts, but in Amazing Spider-Man 300 had his first full appearance. Eddie Brock was the Venom at the time, and is the most synonymous with being paired with the symbiote. However, others such as Matt Gargan, the Scorpion, was once Venom, Flash Thompson, and most recently, Dylan Brock. Venom is something of an anti-hero and occasionally a full villain, depending on who's wearing him and who's writing him. In the game, Venom merges with Harry, and as stated in the Harry Osborn part, and looked and acted a lot like Flash Thompson's more controllable Agent Venom, before becoming more like the classic unhinged and dangerous Venom villain we are more accustomed to. Eventually, he tries to take over the city with his army of symbiotes and his symbiote hives, which the Spider-Men have to stop. In the game's post-game cameo that hints at Spider-Man 3 or a spin-off game, we see the introduction of Cindy Moon. In the comics, Cindy Moon first appears in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, Number 1 from 2014. Cindy was bitten by the same spider that bit Peter after biting him, and she received her own spider powers. Before, Morlun, the villain of the first Spider-Verse series, came to kill spider people, Cindy was locked in a bunker for a number of years, a la Oldboy, explaining why she wasn't swinging around with Peter all this time. When she's freed, she became the vigilante Silk with similar powers to Spider-Man. By Spider-Gwen after she first appeared in the same event Silk was so integral to. Since it doesn't seem Insomniac wants to do the Spider-Verse thing, at least yet, Cindy is a great choice to add to future games, and hopefully this will add some notoriety to the character, since I think she's interesting, even if her character arc is a little contrived.
Go fish! So, nice of you to join us for once, Spidey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was out saving the world.
Alright, let's get back to gameplay for a bit before I have another long rant about Spider-Man lore, and believe me, there's another one coming. Spider-Man 2 sees an expanded city from the first game that maintains much of what we saw in the original map, but is now about twice as large as the maps we saw in Spider-Man PS4 and the Miles Morales spin-off. Sadly, I don't think much new personality was added to the city of New York. I perhaps would have liked more variety between each zones, with each section of the map feeling kind of similar to each other besides the percentage of completion I can see in each area. I don't mind sectioning off the city, but perhaps a little more personality would have been cool. However, with the larger city, Insomniac wanted to revolutionize the traversal system to be more fast-paced. On top of all the old traversal methods from the first game, you now have a pretty fun spider glide mechanic, which sees the Spider-Men able to deploy essentially wings made out of webs that allow the Spider-Man to glide through the city streets when he gains enough speed. This is a pretty fun mechanic, and I found myself seamlessly web swinging to gather speed and launching into my web glider to quickly zip through each burrow much faster than I would have simply web swinging from place to place. It takes a bit to get used to, especially for veteran Spider-Man players out there, but once you get used to it, you can easily add it to your traversal arsenal, and it makes web swinging even more satisfying than the first game, or some of the similar Activision Spider-Man games which use similar mechanics. It's also worth noting, it works a lot different than something like the glide wings Batman has in the Arkham series, with those being easier to do sharp turns and navigate, but moving much slower. These spider gliders are designed to add speed and make zipping around the city even more efficient than it was in the previous two entries of the series. I will say, at points in this game, I thought the movement was almost too smooth, with things happening so fast it was difficult to actually hit an intended target. This showed most when you were attempting to grab the collectible spider bots throughout the city that replaced the backpacks from the first entry in the series. If you want to get around faster though, and don't want to travel place to place with swinging, you can use the game's pretty neat fast travel system by simply going to the menu, pointing to the point on the map you want, and it'll quickly transfer you place to place, seamlessly in a matter of seconds. With the game not actually having specific fast travel points, rather you kind of just point at the map and it'll send you to somewhere safe in the area. The only caveat being that you must do enough of the side missions in each section to unlock fast travel. With that said, there's enough tasks littering the streets that I never really felt a need to use fast travel much until the end of the game, when I was coming close to 100% and just had a few missions unlocked here and there. But for the most part, it's not super necessary. It is, however, a pretty neat little trick. Spider-Man 2 has 5 playable characters throughout the game's runtime, though you will primarily play as Peter and Miles, obviously. It is worth noting Peter has 2 forms, being his standard Spider-Man form and his enhanced symbiote form you can play as midway through the game. Peter Parker is the first lead and has changed only slightly over the original version. Both Peter and Miles boasting new, quicker ways to change between gadgets. If you hold R1 and then select a gadget from the face button, you can quickly shift between gadgets with ease and launch off gadgets at a much faster pace than before. A lot of Peter's specialty attacks, which he can launch off by clicking L1 and selecting a face button, are based on his iron spider arms. I find the Spider-Man combat to be slightly simplified when compared to the original 2 games, making the flow slightly more efficient. Not a huge upgrade, but a solid step forward in the series. I will say some of the new gadgets feel a little less cheesy than the gadgets in the first game, which make you rely a little bit more on your actual combat skills. By the end of the upgrade trees in the first game, I felt like I could just let a few powers fly and take out a whole wave or 2 of enemies without much effort, on top of them restocking pretty quickly in that game. While these gadgets are still slightly overpowered, especially in the late game, it feels more like something that can be used to push you to a more favorable position or help you get back on your feet if you lose your flow during combat, rather than being the overall solution to these combat encounters. Peter definitely isn't as fast as Miles in his standard form, but is more defensive. I found if Miles gets caught in a good chain attack from an enemy, he can quickly get his health depleted to an unsafe level. Peter feels a little more beginner friendly because I found it a lot more uncommon to get sucker punched and quickly lose a chunk of my health bar. That said, Peter in his standard form is more vanilla, with Miles definitely having a few more tricks up his sleeves. First off, Miles is much quicker, as I said, but he also has moves that allow him to become invisible, which is pretty good to get you out of a bind and reposition yourself on the battlefield, as well as being great in early stealth encounters. His electrical special attacks also allow him to hit multiple enemies more efficiently than Peter's iron spider arms, Miles also has a surge special attack that shoots out a strong burst that can knock out a handful of enemies at once. That comes when you fill his surge ability. Standard Peter doesn't have a compatible power, and while his power is fairly rare, it can actually help quite a bit when you're surrounded by a huge group of enemies, and it's a quick way to gain a solid advantage over a group of enemies. Peter Parker in his Venom form is a pretty powerful upgrade from Peter, making him much more unique and giving him some special powers that make him a bit overpowered, perhaps. Most of Peter's Iron Spider powers are replaced with really solid Venom attacks that can hit multiple enemies from further away, or burst into multiple enemies. On top of that, Peter gains a surge meter much like Miles. However, unlike Miles just doing a quick small burst, Peter goes into a sort of rage mode that is comparable to Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry. This thing is absolutely overpowered and can mow down enemies quickly, and deals a lot of damages against the bosses you get to use this against. His Venom mode is more of a power fantasy, and I will say even the bosses are easier. Although the Lizard boss, I kind of forgot I had the Venom Rage boost, despite it being tutorialized, and so that was a little more difficult than it needed to be. Anyhow, keep in mind that you have it, otherwise you're working harder, not smarter, like I did, and the bosses, when you have the black suit, are definitely designed with this in mind. Anyhow, on top of the two Spider-Man, you also have a few other playable allies of Spider-Man. This includes Mary Jane, who you play as in a handful of stealth missions. I always dreaded the MJ missions in the original game, but they are marginally better in this game. For one, MJ gets armed with a stun gun, at points a web shooter, and at one point they're just straight up third-person shooter zap rifle thing. They can all help you in various stealth levels and allow you to take out enemies. It's definitely an upgrade from the hair-pulling Mary Jane levels from the first game, which relied on stealth and very little else, and felt like an attempt to pad out the story and do little else. These Mary Jane levels are somewhat fun, and while you still slowly traverse the level, it grounds you and feels quite a bit different from the standard Spider-Man missions, which you're flying around the map and fighting hundreds of guys at once. Also, you'll die quickly when detected, and it's pretty hard to re-lose the enemies, making it almost certain that you will die if detected. In the missions where you can use stealth as Spider-Man, if you're caught, you just have to fight the enemies. It's fairly easy to just beat down the enemies. With MJ, stealth is a required technique, and it can help you experiment with ways to implement stealth mechanics into the Spider-Man aspects of the game. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't groan a bit every time I was locked into a Mary Jane section, but it wasn't nearly as bad as the first game for sure. Haley Cooper is another playable character. She's one of Miles' friends, and is playable in the side mission Graffiti Trouble. Much like Mary Jane, she's stuck on the ground, but with Haley, they decided to add some minor parkour elements with puzzle solving. The character is deaf, so the world is silent when you play as her. The primary goal of her mission to cover graffiti with murals. And the mission is really simple, but is a decent tech demo for the haptic feedback technology in the controller, and is a nice little relaxing side quest that only takes you 10 or 15 minutes. Finally, we have Venom, who is playable for a quick power fantasy sequence, and because, let's face it, who wouldn't want to play as Venom? I hope this is a backdoor pilot for a Venom DLC or expansion in the vein of Miles, but only time will tell. Venom plays kind of like Spider-Man in his rage mode, but he can't swing like your typical Spider-Man, but he has a lot of really solid moves, and he even gets to go against Kraven for one last fight to show his superiority over Spider-Man's previous in-game adversary. I really enjoyed playing as Venom. Not sure how you'd make a super satisfying game out of him in the future, but I'm sure there's potential for it after this little Venom mission. Along with playable characters, you also get a series of allies which can help in combat encounters. Depending on which Spider-Man you're playing as, you will occasionally receive help from the other Spider-Man, which allows new combos and finishing moves. Wraith will also pop up from time to time for a team-up, as well as Venom when he was linked with Harry. These are all kind of fun little bonuses and add some personality to the fights and missions that involve other heroes. It isn't the most in-depth mechanic, but it's pretty cool and allows for some extra finishers, and it's kind of cool to see another hero swinging around in the background for a team-up. The upgrade system in this game is pretty in-depth, but satisfying to fill out. The first upgrade tree is the suit upgrades, which allow you to gain health, more power, and make traversal easier. This is probably the most important tree from a gameplay standpoint, making encounters and traversals much easier and more satisfying, with visible upgrades every time you unlock an upgrade. These upgrades are earned from a combination of tech parts, which are basic tokens you get consistently through combat encounters, hidden cases throughout the city, and other things. You really don't have to worry much about tech parts. The harder to find things are rare tech parts, hero tokens, and city tokens, which are harder to find, but if you consistently grind out missions and side missions, they'll give you out one of the three. Each upgrade on the tree needs a specific type of token along with tech parts, so token management is important. Hero tokens are particularly hard to grind out until the late game, so I recommend spending those wisely. It's very hard to just brute force one upgrade with an upgrade system like this, and makes you do a variety if you want to consistently upgrade your suit tech. Gadgets uses the same upgrade system and can add a series of upgrades to your gadgets, for example increasing range, power, capacity, and occasionally add fun little gimmicks, like when the Sonic Boom power-up adds little mines that can launch enemies into the air that cross over its range. Finally, you have the combat upgrade, which you can upgrade as you level up. This is on 3 separate trees, one for Peter, one for Miles, and one that is shared moves between the two. These just add new combos and stuff and add a bit to the combat system. On this, I started filling out the shared tree since that seemed to be the most bang for my buck at that point in the story. Then I went over to Peter because he's the most frequently used Spider-Man by a fair margin, and once I finished upgrading him, I circled back to Miles. Once you upgrade your gadgets and suit upgrades, you can start working on purchasing cosmetics. The suits are kind of crappy in this game, and they cost you valuable resources and tokens. I only bought a few suits before filling out my upgrades, including Peter's classic suit, because I like the OG Spider-Man suit and genuinely dislike how Insomniac's suit looks. It's not terrible, but come on, there's a reason Spider-Man's suit hasn't had many long-term cosmetic upgrades since Spider-Man's first appearance. That said, it's also fun being able to play as some comic and movie suits as well. However, a lot of Insomniac's new OC Do Not Steal suits have taken the place of a lot of classic suits, which is kind of annoying. Anyhow, I'm going to talk about each suit. So if you want to skip me talking in nauseam about comic book and movie lore tied to these suits, I would recommend that you skip ahead to the next segment of the video. I can throw a timestamp in the description.
This is something else.
Okay, I'll be totally transparent. This part was not intended to be as long as it is, but whatever. I ended up writing several pages, and let's get going. This game has 78 different suits between Miles and Peter's wardrobe. However, most suits, bar the movie suits, have color variant options, allowing for literally hundreds of different playable costumes. Let's start with Peter's suits. The Advanced Suit 2.0 is a new design for Spider-Man 2, which is an upgrade suit from his advanced suit from the original game. The suit is free, but you can unlock 3 other color variants by purchasing them with standard tech parts. Black suit is unlocked when you get Peter's Venom powers at the end of the Good Men story mission. It is another suit by Insomniac. It's one of the suits that does not have color variants, however. The classic suit is based on, well, the classic Spider-Man suit, as introduced in Amazing Fantasy 15, and continued to be used consistently in the comics ever since. It definitely looks like a solid adaptation of that look, and can be unlocked by using tech parts and city tokens. The additional color waves can be unlocked for tech parts as well. I ran this suit most of the game because, as I mentioned, I just kind of like the classic Spider-Man suit. It stood the test of time because it was cool, and it fits the character well. Nothing fancy, but it's an easy unlock and a good option for people who like the comics. The Scarlet 3 suit is a design based loosely on various Scarlet Spiders over the years. But based on my research, it seems to be an original suit created, merging the design philosophies of the Scarlet Spider suit and Spider-Man's advanced suit. The suit is unlocked with some tech parts and city tokens. Color options are also available for purchase using city tokens and tech parts. Next we have the advanced suit, which is based on the design created for Spider-Man PS4. It is available through purchase using tech parts and city tokens, with colors also being unlockable through tech parts. It is notable this suit has a black color wave, which seems to be a way to get the black suit feel based around the PS4 Spider-Man model, which is a pretty cool variant. The Kumo suit is original to the game and was created by artist Peach Momoko. It is a pretty cool looking outfit, and it has a unique feel for Spider-Man. It can be unlocked with tech parts and city tokens along with its variants, which have the same requirement. The hybrid suit is next, and it's based on Peter's MCU suit that was seen in Spider-Man No Way Home. At this point, it has to be one of Peter's more iconic MCU suits, given the popularity of No Way Home. I will admit, it's a cool suit, but I always found some of Peter's MCU suits perhaps a little over-designed, But I'm the kid that runs around in the classic Spider-Man suit most of the time, so what do I know? Speaking of over-designed, we have the famous basketball suit from Amazing Spider-Man 2012. I actually really liked this suit when I first saw it in the movie, and it works for the tone of the movie for the most part. With that said, it's a terrible movie and kind of a subpar suit. Anyhow, the Amazing suit was also in the 2018 game, and it doesn't have any alternate colors, much like other movie suits in the game. You can unlock this using tech parts and city tokens. Amazing 2 suit is based on the suit from Amazing Spider-Man 2, which might be my favorite suit in the Spider-Man film. This suit skips the alt colors as well, but is definitely a solid rendition of the Spider-Man suit, and looks really good here. You unlock it using tech parts and city tokens. The Spider-Man 2099 suit is based on Spider-Man of Earth 928, who is the Spider-Man of the year 2099. The costume debuted in Spider-Man 2099 #1 in 1992, after a preview of the issue in Amazing Spider-Man 365. The costume looks pretty solid and is accurate. I like that it has more of a metallic appearance, which works despite its often flatter look in the comics. The suit does have color variants as well, and the suit can be unlocked using tech parts and rare tech parts. The Scarlet Spider suit in this game is based on Ben Reilly's suit that debuted in Web of Spider-Man 118. Ben Reilly in the comics is a clone of Peter Parker, an occasional friend and rival to the character. He's been used primarily in Spider-Man's handful of clone sagas, and while the character has become a fan favorite in large part because of his interesting suit, most of his stories confuse the Spider-Man mythos even further than it typically is. The suit is unlocked through tech parts and city tokens, with options to also purchase an additional color pack for some tech parts. The Superior suit is another pretty neat option for Peter to unlock. This suit debuted in Superior Spider-Man #1 and was worn by Doc Ock at a time when he invaded Peter's body as he was dying of cancer. The run is a bit convoluted because it is a main continuity Spider-Man story, but it's actually kind of a fun, unique arc, and it's cool to see this suit in the game as the storyline is starting to gain something of a cult status in comic book circles. Superior Spider-Man takes tech parts and city tokens to unlock, and also has color variants for people who want to jazz it up a bit. The Anti-Ock suit is a suit that originated in the first game and returned here. I didn't love this suit in the first game, but I'll have to admit the white color variant's pretty sweet. This suit can be unlocked by spending tech parts and city tokens. The Arachnite suit, created for Infinity Wars 3 from 2018. I must admit I'm not familiar with this suit since I didn't read that story. I will say it's kind of a cool, almost Batman-inspired suit. It also has a black and red color scheme which really adds to the vibe. Overall, pretty cool suit. You can add it to your collection for tech parts and city tokens, but it's actually fairly expensive, especially since the color variants cost more than a lot of suits featured in the game. The Into the Spider-Verse Noir suit is based on the look of Nicolas Cage's appearance in Spider-Man as seen in the Spider-Verse movie, which is a suit in itself based on Spider-Man Noir from Earth 90214, which debuted in 2008's Spider-Man Noir #1. I was introduced to the character through the game Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, a game written by Dan Slott and inspired the Spider-Verse run he wrote, which in turn inspired the Spider-Verse film, which in turn inspired this suit. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, while more linear than this game, is still very fun, but I will admit the noir sections are pretty damn janky. Anyways, perhaps I'll review that game one day as well. Yeah, Spider-Man has a weird history that ties into a lot of different mediums, but it's a pretty neat suit and it looks pulled right out of the film. You also have an option to do 12 FPS animation based on the film when this suit is applied to better emulate the look in the film, which occasionally dips to 12 FPS to better emulate the pose-to-pace storytelling of comics. The suit does not have any color variations like all movie-based suits and can be purchased for tech parts and city tokens, but bear in mind, it is a fairly expensive cosmetic. The homemade suit is a suit that Spider-Man rocks in Spider-Man Homecoming after Tony Stark confiscates Peter's suit from Civil War. Much like most movie suits, this suit doesn't have any color variants. The suit costs city tokens as well as tech parts. The Spider-Punk suit is based on Hobby Brown from Earth 138, and the look first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 10. This version of the suit is not based on the film, so it actually does have some color variants. It's a pretty cool look. Anyhow, it can be purchased using tech parts and rare tech parts. The Secret Wars Civil War suit is a tactical military suit for Spider-Man that debuted in Civil War Volume 2, Issue 1, which is tied into the 2015 Secret Wars arc. The suit has color variants and can be bought for tech parts and rare tech parts. I don't know much about this suit. I tried reading the 2015 Secret Wars and didn't really like it, so I passed on the tie-in issues and never saw the suit before. It looks cool, if a bit gimmicky, and it can be purchased using tech parts and rare tech parts. The Iron Spider armor was originally introduced in Amazing Spider-Man 529 in 2006. The armor is a pretty good interpretation of the suit in the comics with a nice metallic tinge. The suit was introduced during the Civil War comic event and was made by Tony Stark to beef up Spider-Man's power a bit. I think it's a pretty iconic suit and makes sense why they bring it into the game. And while I think it looks good, they definitely could tone down the shine a bit, I think, just because the comics had a more muted maroon and a shinier gold, which is reversed in this game for some reason. But if you watched our videos, you know I like nitpicking. The suit costs a combo of tech parts and rare tech parts. The webbed black suit, or the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 3 black suit, is a pretty neat suit for anyone nostalgic for that era of Spider-Man films. It has no color variants, and the suit costs tech parts and rare tech parts. It's a pretty neat suit, and is new to this game, which is fitting given that Venom is a prominent character in the game. The webbed suit is the standard Spider-Man suit we see in the Spider-Man films from the early 2000s. This suit was in the first game and returned here. It has no color variants attached, and costs tech parts and hero tokens. Of course, while it's tempting to want to buy this suit, especially if you're a Tobey Maguire fan, it costs hero tokens, which are hard to come by and integral to upgrades, so I wouldn't recommend buying this till the post-game. Sorry, Tobey fans. The upgraded classic suit is another film-based suit, this time the suit from Captain America Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming from the MCU. This is my favorite prominently featured MCU suit, and I remember playing this suit a lot when I unlocked it in the first game because, to be honest, it looks pretty rad, and it's pretty much one for one what I imagine a Spider-Man suit would look like based on the world created for the MCU. Too bad it got replaced with a bunch of weird crap, but I digress. No color variants on this one, and it can be bought for tech parts and city tokens. While you won't have to spend hero tokens on this one, it's still fairly costly, so keep that in mind. The new blue suit is a suit Spider-Man wore made by the Fantastic Four in Fantastic Four Volume 6, number 22 from 2020. I never read this comic run, but Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four as a pairing go way back, with the Fantastic Four being shafted to the background of the Marvel Universe for the last several years, with Disney not owning the film rights and throwing Marvel's first iconic team into the background.
Which reminds me, I think that the four of us should have a name.
Why would we need a name?
Because we're a team now, and there's four of us, so we should come up with a name for it.
Now that Disney owns the film rights to Fantastic Four, they're a thing again, but whatever. It's cool. The suit looks like the one from Spider-Man Homecoming a bit, and it has some color variants, and I think all four options look pretty sweet. It's a nice suit. You can buy it for tech parts and rare tech parts. The upgraded suit is Spider-Man's red and black suit from Spider-Man Far From Home. It's similar to the Homecoming suit visually, with a color swap. The suit was added into the original game and returns here. It has no color palette swaps, being a movie suit. This suit takes 2 hero tokens and some tech parts, so much like Raimi's suit, I'd probably hold off on this one till you max out your upgrades. The stealth suit is Spider-Man's tactical suit he wore in Venice in Far From Home. It's a cool suit and a unique look. I liked this suit in the film because there weren't many suits like it. In the game, you can purchase it for city tokens and tech parts. It does demand a hefty 6 city tokens though, so it may be something you want to hold off on at least till later in the game when you save up a good amount of city tokens. The classic black suit had to be in this game, first appearing in Secret Wars 8 from the original 1984 event, not to be confused with the later 2015 event by the same name. It's sort of iconic and integral. And while I think the standard black option is cool, this has some of the best color variants in the game and is a necessity in this Venom heavy game. The standard black suit is based on the first appearance in Secret Wars number 8, but the variants include a purplish one that emulates how it was shaded on an old comic page, an inverted one that looks like the anti-Venom, and one with wider eyes that brings to mind the suit's appearance in Brian Michael Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man run when Peter of Earth 1610 had a similar symbiote suit. Great suit, A+. The suit takes 3 requirements if you want the whole 4-pack, which is tech parts, rare tech parts, and for the alt colors you'll need city tokens and more tech parts. It's definitely more expensive than the early suits, but by the time you get to the point where the suit is purchasable at level 50, which is towards the end of the game, the suit shouldn't dent your token stash too much. The Iron Spider suit is based on the MCU's interpretation of the Iron Spider armor that was first put to screen in Avengers Infinity War. This is a pretty iconic suit at this point, given that it ties into one of the largest films of all time, and I do think it's a pretty cool suit that meshes Iron Man and Spider-Man in such a cool way. Not something I rock much in the game, but I'm glad it's here. It costs tech parts and rare tech parts. Since it's a movie suit, again, no color variants. The new red and blue suit is based on what was teased at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home. As far as I know, this may be the best look at this particular suit we've gotten so far, and presumably, if and when they do make another Spider-Man in the MCU, this is the suit he'll be wearing in the film. I like that the MCU is trying to finally set Peter off on his own. I don't mind Tom Holland's take on the character, but I started groaning a bit when every entry seemed to put him as a junior Avenger with another character guiding Spider-Man. Since I think the appeal of him in most universes is that he's a solo character that takes on the weight of the world on his shoulders. Anyhow, I think this suit is pretty cool and probably the closest we've seen to Steve Ditko's original concepts on film. It has no color skews and can be purchased for tech parts and rare tech parts. The black and gold suit is also based on a suit that features in No Way Home, and is an inverted version of his suit from Far From Home. It's an alright suit, I like the gold on it, but it's fairly flash in the pan, only being seen in a few scenes in the film. It can be purchased for tech parts and rare tech parts. The Life Story suit is an astronaut suit based on Spider-Man Life Story storyline. I never read this concept, but the comic seems interesting. It imagines if the characters of Peter and Miles aged in real time based on their birthdays at the time of their appearance. It is a newer series from 2019, and I'm kind of interested in checking it out after reading into the story concept. That said, I don't know if this is my favorite suit, but it's alright. Looks more like a NASCAR suit than a spacesuit to me. The suit is a free unlock that you can only get once you beat the entire game and get the final EMF mission. And you can purchase a few colors to go with it for a few tech parts and a city token. The Last Hunt suit is an original design created for the game. It's meant to look like Kraven and is a fun nod to the first half of the game. You can receive the suit by taking out all the hunter bases and get color variants with tech parts and city tokens. The Saving Lives suit is a suit based on Wraith, and is gained by creating the Flame side quest in the game. I don't like this suit. I think the color combos and texture of the suit look pretty ugly. It's another original suit that has some color variants you can purchase with tech parts and city tokens. The Anti-Venom suit is unlocked during the Set Things Right mission, which is pretty much a cleaner and inverted version of the standard Venom suit that we get towards the start of the game. I like a lot of the costumes, but at points, Peter's wardrobe feels more movie-centric. Like, did we need 20 suits based on Tom Holland's version of the character, while some of my favorite suits are left on the back burner? Like the Negative suit, the Wrestler suit, the Big Time suit, Spirit Spider, the MK4, the Vintage Comic suit, Undies, the Kane suit, and more. There were so many great suits in the first game based around the comics and other ideas, and it's frankly just kind of a downer that what we ended up getting was mostly original suits and movie suits with a handful of comic book suits, some of which are from more recent runs and stuff that just frankly doesn't look all that exciting. And a lot of Insomniac suits were pretty over-designed. But on to Miles' costumes. Starting with Miles' upgraded suit, it takes a lot of characteristics from the main Miles suit in the comics, but adds a little bit of a padded armor look that Peter's upgrade suit has as well. It is definitely more close in the comics than Peter's Insomniac outfit. The suit is equipped from the start of the game, so you don't have to use parts on it, but the color skews you'll need to cough up some tech parts and city tokens. I like some of the other color variants, and it even has one inspired by Peter's Insomniac suit, which looks pretty sick. The Family Business suit is based off of a suit Aaron Davis, the Prowler, wore in the comics, when he was the leader of the Sinister Six pretending to be Spider-Man. I can't find the exact issue the suit first appeared in, but the general idea is that Aaron bought the suit off the black market to lead the Sinister Six as an evil version of the Iron Spider. Sounds like a pretty cool idea, and I'll probably track down these issues eventually if I can. However, the reason I couldn't find this from my research is just the classic numerous Spider-Man books a month coming out with numerous time slots. I'm sure I could have found it if I put more effort into it, but I didn't care to. The classic Miles suit is based on the standard suit from the comics, which first appeared in Ultimate Comics Spider-Man number 5. It has a few color skews, including one that is red and black, and brings to mind Doc Ock's suit from the Superior Spider-Man, and the classic suit. That one is pretty sweet. The suit is pretty cheap, costing only a few tech parts and city tokens. The tracksuit is a suit that was featured at the end of Spider-Man Miles Morales and was an original suit to that game, integrating the white of Peter's suit to give it a different flair to Miles' classic suit. It also has variant colors mimicking Peter and 2099 suit, as well as one that looks more like his classic costume. This is another cheap one you can buy for tech parts and a city token, and I don't think it looks very good. The next suit is Brooklyn 2099. It isn't from the comics, but rather what Miles would look like if he existed in the world of 2099 as designed by Insomniac. It has a few color waves, and I think some of them are pretty cool. It's nice to kind of imagine an alternate Spider-Man to that of 2099's Miguel. It's also a cool suit that can be purchased for 30 tech parts and a hero token, which as per usual I would recommend you don't move forward with purchasing until the end game after you finish your upgrade tree, since those hero tokens are pretty thinly spread until the post-game. The sportswear suit is the first suit Miles had in the series and is just a bunch of, well, sports gear with a mask borrowed from Peter. I kind of like this suit. It feels pretty homegrown, and that's kind of the appeal of Spider-Man, being a totally self-made hero. The suit costs tech parts as well as a couple city tokens, but is pretty affordable for the most part. The Life Story suit ties to the same Life Story comic run as Peter's costume of the same name. This one has kind of a Star Trek-y look with a space helmet. I dig this one. It only costs tech parts and city tokens, so if you like it, you can pretty much buy it whenever you want. Miles Morales 2099 is another interpretation of Miles Morales in 2099. This version was from a variant cover of Miles Morales Spider-Man number 12 and is not actually canon to any continuity. I think it's another pretty unique take, a little more slick for my liking perhaps than the standard 2099 suit, which I liked as well. But 2099 in the comics is super grimy, kind of like Blade Runner or something, so I think I like the other 2099 suit better for the look of the 2099 universe, and this one is more of a concept. This looks more like a Spider-Man that would belong in Batman Beyond than Batman 2099, if that makes sense. Still pretty cool though. You can get it for tech parts and a couple rare tech parts. The advanced tech suit is a more armored version of the standard Spider-Man outfit, and meh, I don't really care for it. Miles kind of has a lot of lackluster gimmick suits that are basically just normal suits but look way cheesier. Anyways, the suit can be unlocked for tech parts and city tokens. It returns from Miles Morales for PS5. The Shadow Spider suit is some shit made up for this game and is another decent suit. It kind of plays to your standard Assassin's Creed hooded knight type thing. I would never play as it because it doesn't really feel like a Spider-Man costume to me, but it has a few bonus colors, including an option to LARP as Ezio from Assassin's Creed. It's sort of expensive, costing 3 city tokens and some tech parts, but, you know, if this is your thing, go for it. Miles Morales 2020 is a costume variant cover of Miles Morales Spider-Man, much like the 2099 suit, and is not canon to the comics, with this one being a Daft Punk or EDM inspired suit. It's cool and has some decent variants, but I still don't get the fascination with giving Miles so many non-canonical suits when there are many great suits left on the chopping block for Peter. I can see the appeal of this suit though, and for people who like that type of music, it might be kinda neat. You can get this suit for 45 tech parts and a few city tokens. The Purple Rain suit is an original design by Insomniac, and much like a lot of their suits, is very over-designed. You can get this suit for 2 hero tokens and a couple tech parts. A cost I think is way too steep for this ugly ass suit. The Bodega Cat suit is a costume worn by Spider-Man and returns from Miles Morales. I really like this suit because cats are amazing. It also has a pretty cool color scheme, and I like the variants even if they aren't super crazy by any means. The suit can be unlocked for tech parts and a few city tokens, but is a hair expensive. I ended up using this for the post-game quite a bit, and I thought it was pretty fun. The Forever suit is another suit, just made up from a variant cover. It imagines what if Miles Morales was Black Panther. And that's pretty neat. The standard suit is definitely an amalgamation of the two characters, but I like the black on black suit and the gold on black suit as well. They bring to mind Black Panther and Killmonger's MCU appearances. It's pretty cool. You can get these suits for some tech parts and some rare tech parts. Miles' homemade suit is another actual comic suit worn in the actual comics and not just a variant cover, which is surprisingly rare in this comic book game. It originated in Spider-Man Annual Volume 2, Number 1, but was in the first Miles Morales game as well. It's an alright suit and has a few color waves. Regardless, it will cost you tech parts and hero tokens, so again, you may want to hold off on this one until you beat the campaign. Into the Spider-Verse suit is based on Miles' appearance in, well, Into the Spider-Verse. I really like the homemade feel of this suit being an old Peter Parker suit retrofitted, and the Spider-Man logo on the suit fits well to the movie. This is a cool one to see translated here. The suit costs 60 tech parts and 2 hero tokens. While it's a hefty price, I can see why someone would fold to this price and purchase it even before the post-game. The suit being a movie suit has no color swapping capabilities. The Into the Spider-Verse SB suit is a pretty neat suit based on his first mission, when he's essentially in just a cheap Spider-Man Halloween costume with a cape. You can get it for tech parts and city tokens, and it's a new suit to the game. The End suit is based on the suit from Miles Morales, The End, from 2020, and it's a pretty cool suit. It gives me the Red Hood from Batman vibes, and I like the more tactical yet street look. It's a cool mix that works well for the content of that story, which is a comic where Miles is leading a dying population of the world in a last stand, focusing in Brooklyn, New York. Pretty cool. It'll cost you a decent amount of tech parts, but no tokens, so it really won't set you back that much. The Miles Morales 10th Anniversary suit is a suit that debuted in Miles Morales Spider-Man 30. And it's a pretty cool looking suit. I like how it takes a lot of liberties for the character's design, for better and for worse. And this suit
is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen. It gives me goosebumps.
It comes in 4 colors, and I think the blue and purple one is best. The suit will cost you tech parts and rare tech parts. The Programmable Matter suit is another hideous design from the Insomniac team and comes in 4 colors. The green one is probably my favorite, but I just kind of hate this design, and I think Insomniac tries too hard to make cool suits and over-designs some of these costumes. What's worse is that this suit will cost you valuable hero tokens. Speaking of over-design, the Strike suit looks like something out of an action figure toy line from the 1990s.
Spider-Man! Only Spider-Force has transforming bugs that turn into battle armor. Wasp's bug makes her a warrior. Swarm transforms. Spidey swats him down.
And don't mistake that for a compliment. On top of that, it requires way too much, taking 6 city tokens and 80 tech parts. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. suit first appeared in Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man number 9 as a variant cover. And I like this suit. I always liked the design of the S.H.I.E.L.D. uniform, and it's pretty simplistic. It has some notable color variants too. I actually really like the all black one because it kind of looks like a comic book version of that Peter stealth suit from Far From Home. The Great Responsibility suit is probably my favorite Miles suit. I like those early Miles appearances, and I think this was actually a pretty good starter suit for the character, appearing way back in Ultimate Fallout number 4 back in 2011. It does share Peter's colors, but you can optionally pick Miles' trademark colors as a variant to the suit, and I really like the white and black one too. I just really like this suit, and I think it's one of Miles' most slept-on suits in his relatively short history. It costs tech parts and rare tech parts, so it's pretty obtainable, and by the time the suit is purchasable when you hit level 42, it won't be too steep of an ask, so if you like the suit as much as I do, I would definitely recommend picking it up. The Across the Spider-Verse suit is a suit made for Across the Spider-Verse. I don't like this suit as much as the Into the Spider-Verse suit, but it's still an okay suit. It has no color variants being a movie suit and costs hero tokens, so it's another post-game suit in my opinion. The Crimson Cowl is a suit you can earn if you pay a couple hero tokens and tech parts. It's an okay suit designed by Insomniac, but I think the Miles 2099 suit is quite a bit nicer and achieves a similar cowled look to that suit, which is also a fair bit easier to obtain than this one, not costing hero tokens and being much cheaper in the tech parts department. The Best There Is suit is a suit by Insomniac and is a bit of a tease for the upcoming Wolverine game, taking the look of Wolverine's cowl and merging it into a Spider-Man suit. It also has a jacket reminiscent of Wolverine's. The main colors follow Miles' color theming, but if you buy the color variants, you can get variant costumes that look like other versions of Wolverine, including his X-Force color scheme and his more classic color scheme. I think the one I like the most is the yellow and blue, because I'm a sucker for that old school yellow and blue Wolverine. The Dark Ages suit is based on Miles' appearance from the comic series Dark Ages from 2021. The suit is intended to look like a mix of Venom and Carnage as Miles merges with both symbiotes at once. It's a lot of design here, but I actually think it's pretty decent and can be purchased for tech parts, but a painful 3 hero tokens. The Absolute Carnage suit is another suit in the same vein as the Dark Ages suit, but a little less gimmicky. I still like both, however this shows what it would look like if a symbiote took over Miles, and achieves that look a little better to me. I like the alternate colors quite a bit more than the standard suit. But even the base isn't that bad, and I see why they went with what they went with for the standard suit because of the Miles colors. The suit showed up in Absolute Carnage, Miles Morales #1, and can be purchased for tech parts and city tokens. The King in Black suit is another Venom-esque suit with similar color variations to the last couple suits. You can get it by finishing the symbiote nests, which is probably the last thing you're going to do in the game. So, unless you just want to take a couple glory swings around the city, you probably won't be using this suit very much until New Game Plus drops. The Boyarka suit is a Captain America-esque suit that looks solid to me. It sort of reminds me of when Bucky was Captain America back in the day, which the Bucky suit was so cool to me at that time. Anyhow, there's a few patriotic options for this suit, and it first appeared in Marvel's Voices, The Community, a comic about Latino characters of the Marvel Universe. The suit costed tech parts and 2 city tokens. The Smoke and Mirrors suit is a suit that originated in the game and is based on Mysterio. It's a pretty cool suit from Insomniac, and the team definitely didn't shy away from their affinity of over-designing suits here. However, it still looks pretty good and is a free bonus for finishing the Mysterio side quest. The colors just take tech parts and rare tech parts, so it's pretty cheap, and I like the white costume variant especially. When you finish all the Hunter bases, you unlock the Most Dangerous Game suit. This is based off of Kraven's design and look, and looks pretty neat. The colors are pretty nice too, and the colors are a relatively cheap upgrade, just costing tech parts and a couple city tokens. It's pretty similar to Peter's Kraven suit, but I still like it. City of Sounds is a jazz-inspired suit based on the 1930s casual fashion you get by beating the Cultural Museum side missions. I like the retro look of the costume, nothing too major here. It has a couple alternate colors, but I think the base that is free for completing the side mission is the best color. The other side styles are 20 tech parts and city tokens, and will be easy for a completionist to get through. Finally, we have the Evolved Miles suit, which was Insomniac's failed attempt to redesign Miles for the 4th time in counting. Much like most of their original suits, everyone hates it. It also had a series of tie-in merch with Adidas, and he wears Adidas shoes, kind of like how Sonic wore soap shoes in Sonic Adventure 2. It also cuts Miles' mask to a 3/4 mask, which is pretty rare these days in comics and just doesn't fit at all here. I think Insomniac tried a few times to create a usable costume for Miles, and while I think people generally like Peter's Spider-Man look from the PS4 and PS5 games, despite me not particularly loving them, I don't think Insomniac has found a way to reinvent Miles in a similar way. The deluxe version also unlocks a few suits, which is behind a paywall. You can upgrade your copy to be in a deluxe version if you didn't buy the deluxe version standard. So these are basically just DLC suits. All of these suits look fucking horrible and have no color variants, and are original designs. I'll just do a slideshow on these. I have no thoughts. My thoughts are the same for all of these. They fucking suck. First for Peter, the Aretino suit. And what was with the names, man? A Punctalictic Peter, the Tactical suit, the Stone Monkey suit, and the 25th Century suit. For Miles, the Encoded suit, the Biomechanical suit, the Tukasu suit, which I take it back, I like this one. Power Rangers Miles Morales is pretty cool. I can get behind it. I'm not going to buy this DLC for it, unless it like comes with like some sort of expansion pass. But that one's kind of cool. The Igimat suit, I can't read that. The Red Spectre suit, and that's it. Those are the suits we have unlocked so far. I'm sure the DLC hopefully will have some good additions. Some of the cut content suits would be cool. But we'll probably get some more ugly Insomniac suits, realistically.
Hey, that's city property! So, I'm a taxpayer.
There are a series of thugs that you will fight along the way. One thing I really enjoyed is that while there are basic archetypes for each thug, Every villain has their own somewhat unique strategies and present unique challenges. Example of this being the hunters, who have a bird, and dog robots. The dog robots can use EMP pulses that throw off your technology and make you have to rely more on your basic combat till you can disable the dogs. The birds are aerial enemies, and while they aren't very strong, they can be kind of a pain to deal with since you'll have to zip up to them and destroy them, which admittedly occasionally gets frustrating when you accidentally click triangle and get sent to an enemy that you weren't trying to target. Meanwhile, you often have ranged enemies to deal with, and while your standard grunts, who occasionally are bulky, may have shields, it actually takes some getting used to since each enemy has different strategies. Each enemy can be defeated pretty easily if you know how and don't put yourself in a bad spot. Close range gunners can have something thrown at them, so I recommend if they lock onto you, immediately attempt to do an object throw. On standard difficulty, Spider-Man's throw is quicker, so you won't get hit unless you're slipping and can't grab something fast enough. Alternatively, you can web zip them, but that will potentially give standard enemies a solid reset, so I wouldn't recommend that if you're in a good position. Sniper enemies are exclusively in base levels, but they can be a bit tricky, especially when there's several of them. It's usually pretty well shown before you're actually detected, since they have big laser pointers you can see pretty easily, so I recommend using stealth takedown to take down the snipers when possible. If you missed one, just stay fairly evasive and go over there. Snipers won't hit you often, but when they do, they can really take a number out on your health bar. Shield and crowbar enemies are a bit more of a pain. You usually have to evade them a bit and get behind them, and they go down pretty easily after that. However, if you want to be like me and not deal with it, you can just use one of your special moves or gadgets and just web them up. The final class of enemy is the heavy. These guys hit hard and are bullet sponges, but are very slow. Being that they're slow and common, it's not hard to learn their timing to drop a parry on them. Unlike a standard evade, the parry will stun the enemy and leave him open to attacks. This is a good time to hit him hard, especially at the end of an encounter after a successful parry. Hit him a few times, then use a special or a gadget to keep that combo going. These guys occasionally get powered up with an axe or something, but the strategy is pretty universal. Once you learn how to parry the large enemies, they become quite a bit easier than having to deal with them standard. When it comes to missions, this game has several chapters in the game, so if you go straight through and don't 100% the game isn't all that long relatively. The game starts with a very cinematic mission, Surface Tension, that sees Peter and Miles go up against the Sandman. The mission is pretty straightforward and acts mostly as a tutorial or a refresher course for the combat and traversal. However, the general look and feel is very cinematic, with you trying to outmaneuver Sandman and defeat the villain in question while jumping through buildings. Kind of reminded me of the Sandman mission from Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, but that was a little more on rails. A few filler and story missions follow to tutorialize the game, but the game picks back up. After this, a good portion of the story is dedicated to Kraven and the Hunters, including a few good encounters, like when Kraven's fighting Spider-Man at the zoo with Harry, who at this point is possessed by the Venom symbiote. Kraven can be a little tricky even with the suit, in a lot of ways taking a lot of the skills possessed by his henchmen and combining it into one big bullet sponge. I think it's worth noting Spider-Man's final encounter with Kraven is in the black suit, and while the rage mode helps, the dogs he recruits can wipe out your gadgets and power moves, which will set you back a bit. So the best way to efficiently beat Kraven is to beat down the dogs and then try to effectively utilize the rage mode to beat Kraven. Later in the game, when you fight him as Venom, you still have to utilize many of these same skills and powers. After the power trip that was the rest of the Venom level, I kind of expected Kraven to go down easy, but they definitely wake you up a bit, because I got stomped the first time thinking it would be a free win, just kind of to illustrate how OP Venom is. It still is much easier than when you fought him as Spider-Man, but you'll actually have to focus a bit and be aggressive. The bosses all take fairly aggressive play, to be honest. Starting with the Lizard, especially midway through the game, you'll learn if you play passively, you won't do too well against these bosses. This continues to Mr. Negative, and of course Kraven. Sadly, I feel like a lot of the bosses played similar. Stun him with a gadget, or use a super move on him, beat him down, then actually start using the environment once or twice to get some free hits with their weakness, and restart. Usually you have to beat every boss 2 or 3 times, and they all take a ton of damage. A lot of bosses have different stages, like I said, but often the pattern doesn't really change enough to actually make it feel fresh. And once you figure out the few patterns the boss has, it kind of feels like a grind. Scream, for example, when Mary Jane gets her own symbiote, you're going to think he's going to be a real thing. But then, you just fight the boss 4 times. By that time I was super upgraded too, so it was pretty easy. She did get me once because the Venoms can combo you pretty good. And I was low on health and powers by the time I jumped into that 3rd stage. But people have to keep in mind I'm also pretty bad at video games, and I felt like this encounter should have been harder. Frankly, the bosses all feel a little cookie cutter to me, with the most unique boss probably being Sandman, if you want to count that as a boss. They put so much time and energy into the game, I just wanted better set pieces for my bosses. I remember the Activision games, which were certainly less grounded and probably magically even easier than this game, actually had some pretty solid and unique bosses. Shattered Dimensions, which I keep bringing up, especially had awesome bosses, and you fought Kraven and Venom in that game. And it felt like there was more to do than just punch good. Perhaps Lizard could have had a form that was too powerful for standard Spider-Man, so you had to grind up hits and dodges until you could get the Venom mode and beat him down from there. Perhaps Venom could have required the loud sounds to put down a shield that's otherwise impenetrable, so you have to use your sonic blasts or position yourself to make the loud noises. Instead, the game feels like blast out all your powers, perhaps parry once or twice, and rinse and repeat until you beat the bosses 2 to 4 times. These boss fights sometimes feel a bit monotonous, but are occasionally fun and intense. A lot of the missions as well are just kind of beating simple traverse puzzles and then traveling between arenas to beat waves of enemies and ending up in an arena to fight a boss 4 times. Stealth also feels rarely essential, bar the Mary Jane missions as I said, so there isn't much change to that format, and eventually, once you're leveled up, the fights become so easy, why not just hop in as Spider-Man and fight the whole crowd at once? I didn't really see much of a motivation to actually try stealth. It's kind of a shame too, because I think the story is really solid. It's just by the end, it starts repeating itself quite a bit. The gameplay loop is fun enough that this doesn't hurt the game too much, but no doubt it is a gameplay loop. The end game is accumulation of everything you've learned throughout the game, with 3 different playable characters to wrap up the story. Spider-Man gets the anti-Venom suit from Mr. Negative and Miles, which allows you to safely use your Venom powers again, and the final mission plays in a few parts. First you start off as Mary Jane, and this mission's a little less stealth-heavy and more of a third-person shooter. It's actually kind of a fun turn-up. And Mary Jane also gets to fight a tank symbiote, which kind of acts as her boss. It killed me once, but once you learn to shoot the sound panels and then start blasting the thing, it's not too hard. Then you play as Peter at the high school against Venom, since Venom and Harry have merged. This fight is pretty easy, and feels pretty similar to the other boss fights. Then you go to the Emily May Foundation and finish the boss fight as both Peter and Miles. The end of the fight ends on about a 3-minute quick-time event scene, which doesn't rely on anything like timing or being good, it's just tap the punch button a bunch of times. The story ends with a few sweet cutscenes and hints at Spider-Man 3, which very well could be it for the Spider-Man series for now. The only time I died in these last few levels was against the tank Venom that served as Mary Jane's boss battle. I genuinely thought the fights against Venom were way too easy, like ridiculously, on the difficulty I was on. I still think in a lot of ways Arkham Asylum did this style of superhero action game best, and that game is still aging pretty fast. The combat is smooth, but the gadgets you get only take you so far, and you have to rely on your skill quite a bit. The stealth is also essential because guys with guns will pretty much tear you up immediately. Plus, the architecture of that game is just amazing with lots of cool things to find. In Spider-Man, there's a few standout locations like Kraven's Lair and Arena, but it's mostly just cityscapes. I think this has been a problem with all Arkham games and Arkham-likes since the original game, and the only reason I'm being this critical is that Arkham is a game that has been out well over a decade now, and feels like, based on all the superhero games that kind of followed in its coattails, seems to have the most to look at and the most engaging combat. There's a lot of different variety, it's a lot more challenging, and in this game, sometimes I just felt, especially at the end, I don't even know if I was too good for the game anymore, or if the game just upgrades you too much. Instead of having a skill curve that goes up, it almost feels reversed, where as you continue to power up and get better, the game gets much easier. So I think there could have been a better skill curve, And hopefully the New Game Plus will kind of address that issue a little bit. Playing on normal is kind of an odd difficulty to play on. It shouldn't be, but in this game it just kind of feels odd. So if you're a veteran to this genre, I would definitely recommend going to the hard difficulty. Maybe not like Superhero or whatever they call the hardest one, because that's probably cheap at that point. In fairness to Spider-Man, I think the side missions do fare a bit better in expanding the world and creating cool locations. Mysterio's missions, for example, are really fun and solid, despite feeling a bit like those old Scarecrow missions from the Arkham games. And the final fight against Mysterio, while not all that hard, is still really trippy and fun. It's more of a fun gauntlet. Mysterio isn't a tank like most of the main story villains, but aesthetically it's really cool. The Sandman missions are basic gauntlets that are piss easy, and that's the same with the Hunter bases, the Flame missions, and even the Venom nests. But Kraven's birds are pretty fun. You essentially do the classic Superman 64 fly through rings mission mode. But in this version it's actually really fun because the gliding's super satisfying. You're going through buildings, dodging obstacles, and you have to make some tricky turns. And this was probably the hardest part of the game for me at points. At least it's the points where I failed the most. But it wasn't so hard it's frustrating like some of these fly through rings mini games. It's actually like pretty well designed. These missions work on a completion percentage, and you can get further completion percentage by doing special encounters, like flying through buildings or under bridges, which will get you done with a race quicker. Occasionally, there's also cute little side missions for FNSM requests. One of my favorites was Howard. You just look at Howard's birds with Howard for like 10 minutes, and then Howard says he wants to give his birds a new home and wants them to see the world. So you swing around the map with a bunch of birds, and then you find them a new home. By the time you return, Howard predictably has passed away. These missions are mostly just cute little side missions, and I like them because it shows Spider-Man will always just be a solid guy. There's nothing too special or world-breaking about them. And it's a nice breakup from constant combat loops and allows you to kind of explore the map further, which I think is fun. Honestly, for whatever reason, I had more fun doing these side quests a lot of times than the main game. Admittedly, some of it was just the same old gauntlets. As I said, most of these side missions are just gauntlets, but they're pretty fun, and it's cool to kind of have a theme to work off of and fly around the city, and it's pretty cool. If you think my interpretation of the gameplay is a little harsh, you probably won't like my thoughts on the collectibles. In the game, you can collect Sandman memories, which will tell you a side story about Sandman after you fight his gauntlets. You can also collect spider bots, and you can of course collect suits. I think the suit selection is a huge step down from the first game, as we discussed, and I think the spider bots are also a really boring replacement for Peter's old backpacks from the first game. The backpacks told us so much about Peter's first years as Spider-Man, and told us a lot about this Spider-Man leading up to the game, and were chock full of fun references and Easter eggs to the original comics, movies, and anything else they could really reference. This game kind of just felt like they didn't want to do something like that again, so they included these spider bots, and it's like, oh cool, you found a spider bot and it's colored like Spider-Man 2099. Perhaps it'd be cool if I couldn't just pop on the Spider-Man 2099 suit. Like, we're just seeing recolors of a shitty spider asset with little else actually included with it. Once you collect all the spiders, you do get a cool little cutaway, which I think was referencing the PS1 Activision game, but I don't really know. Anyhow, these would be kind of a pain in the ass to find. They don't have a marker on the map, but each zone will tell you how many you need. So here's the expert strategy that made it so I never had a hard time finding it. I would go to the closest corner of the map, and then I would go across horizontally. Then I'd cut across the map diagonally, go again across horizontally, and then again across diagonally. And that literally found every one. You essentially just make a big X over that portion of the city while tapping your detect button, and you'll see the purple icon come onto your screen, which will target it and tell you approximately where you're looking to find that spider bot. I didn't find these very satisfying, and I was bummed we didn't get a suitable replacement for the backpacks, which I hope they up their collectible game for the next one, but I guess we'll see. Graphically speaking, Spider-Man is a step up from the original game, but in the same ballpark as Miles in the remastered edition that they did of the first game, that they put out around the same time as Miles. I think it would have been nice, personally, if they had more weather changes, maybe a day and night cycle in the game, that you could swap on the menu or something. There are occasional changes, but nothing really major. I still thought it looked really good though, and it definitely feels like an upgrade from the original PS4, but considering this is the first mainline Spider-Man game in 5 years, I think a little more could have been done. I don't love that they switched to Peter. I don't think this new look is that bad, it just at points looks a lot like Tom Holland, and I just liked the fact that the original Spider-Man actor looked more unique and like a new Spider-Man. Neither looked particularly bad, it's not a huge thing, I know some people make a big deal out of it. But anyways, whatever. The music is fine throughout the game, it was just kind of decent Spider-Man sounding tunes, but I never really felt the music blew me away. One thing that bothered me was occasionally a licensed song would show up, for example, the level where Peter and Harry go to their old high school and have a flashback stealth segment. They just pull the riff from Cage the Elephant's Cigarette Daydreams, and perhaps it's because I really like Cage the Elephant and they're one of my favorite bands, but I found it kind of poorly integrated into the game as I'm biking down the road for 6 or 7 minutes listening to a loop of a 2.5-minute song without lyrics.
Why did they license the Cigarette Daydreams instrumental? Just like the chords for the chorus, dude.
It's kind of weird. I've heard people say that this game is a buggy mess. Granted, that's what I was reading on Facebook from Xbox fans. And I'm a fan of Xbox too, so no shade, but I thought it was pretty well polished for the most part. I did hit a couple minor glitches, nothing all that major. One thing that's happened is I was set to do a charge jump, which will make the controller vibrate a bit, and my controller continued to vibrate after I did that until I saved and quit out to the menu and went back in. For some reason, this glitch happened to me twice. Even after writing this segment, it happened to me the second time. So, yeah, I don't know what that's about. I don't know if other people experience that, but if you're going to do a charge jump and your controller starts vibrating, you might have to quit out, which is moderately annoying, but loading times are so good these days, it didn't really bother me that much. The other glitch I encountered was on one of the biking missions to meet J. Jonah Jameson. My bike wheel just went into the ground and got stuck. I had to reload from the last checkpoint, which wasn't a big deal.
Probably the only person who's discovered that because you're so bad at biking.
What the fuck? Are you fucking kidding me? Can I tap
it? Bro, all you had to do was bike in a straight line.
Well, I biked into the fucking straight line, bro.
But for a game of this scale and being open world, the amount of polish on this game seemed incredibly impressive. I don't think I've played many other games to this scale where I haven't noticed more glitches. Like, this is probably one of the most polished games I've seen to this size, and given that it's on relatively new hardware, I thought it was pretty impressive. Critically, Spider-Man 2 got rave reviews, as well as Game of the Year nomination from the IGN Game Awards.
Baldur's Gate 3.
And Metacritic assigned the game a score of 91 out of 100. IGN and GameSpot both gave it an 8 out of 10, and in fact, none of the major gaming publications seemed to really give Spider-Man a negative score from what I could tell. My overall reaction is that, despite my many criticisms of Spider-Man 2, it's a fun game with a solid Spider-Man story. A lot of Spider-Man's main media, even the comics to an extent, have been so wrapped in the multiverse or being so global that it's nice to just swing around New York and have a story of Miles and Peter having fun. Spider-Man also bolsters an amazing supporting cast, people like MJ, Norman, and Harry, not to mention Miles and his supporting cast, that adds some good human drama on top of the standard Spider-Man drama. Spider-Man in a lot of ways is the equivalent of a soap opera with costumes, so if you don't get a little wrapped into the human elements, I don't think the Spider-Man story is doing a pretty good job. And that's not a blow to Spider-Man at all, it's just an apt comparison. Every week seems to be your new convoluted retcon or dramatic death or return or a clone or whatever. Spider-Man is probably one of the most convoluted character dramas in the history of the world. The story does a good job of crescendoing into a bigger and bigger disaster until New York becomes a total hellhole. And in the ending cutscene, when Peter retires from being Spider-Man and leaves the city in Miles' hands, it felt bittersweet. Miles finally kind of gets to spread his wings on his own and stop playing sidekick, and Peter gets to start creating a life with Mary Jane and let himself and his relationship come first instead of Spider-Man. And with the Silk Tease, it's possible that Miles will be in Peter's shoes soon, too. So it's cool that everything kind of comes full circle at the end of the game. Harry survives separating from Venom, and Norman starts a project that will probably make him a goblin in the following games. So I'm sure there will still be a lot more we see from Peter in the future. And perhaps in a DLC or midquel, we can see Miles train Cindy in the new, now expanding Spider family. Well, gameplay-wise, I don't think this is a large jump besides some quality of life upgrades. I like how the new glide feature and simplified gadget system feels. I still think it's a pretty decent improvement. And while the gameplay loop isn't too much different, level by level, it still allows for some fun moments. I think the integration of the haptic feedback is really neat, too. I'm still fairly new to the PS5, picking it up around a month before the launch of this game, so I'm still pretty impressed by those bells and whistles like haptic feedback that some owners that have had it since day one might not be wowed by. But its integration here was pretty fun and nice. And the variety of playable characters, enemies, and bosses help keep the gameplay fairly fresh despite the general repetitive nature of the gameplay. Also, while a lot of the side content was fun, the collectible spiders aren't up to snuff with the backpacks from the first game, and a lot of the suits are kind of feel like filler. I can't fathom leaving some of the suits not included out to dry, while adding so many suits that were over-designed and kind of boring. I'm not expecting every suit to return, but there were 5 or 6 suits I loved that I really missed, in place of a bunch of suits that were newer that just didn't impress me as much. I also only get so much mileage out of 8 Tom Holland suits, and some of the side stuff is a little bit mixed for me, sadly. Ultimately, while I can complain up and down about the gameplay, and I have a lot of complaints, it's not to say anything against the quality of this game. I actually think it's very solid. In conclusion, it may sound like it, but I don't think I'm that far off from the mainstream critics on Spider-Man 2. It's a very good game. However, it doesn't reinvent the wheel too much and definitely feels like a safe sequel with a few added elements that are fun. The experience is clean, and I didn't rush through it. I finished the game this week, a number of weeks after launch, and I picked it up on launch day. It wasn't that I was bored playing, I just wanted to take my time and work on upgrades and side content. I also think it's one of those games where perhaps if you do too much in one sitting, at least for me, it might become kind of overwhelming and a little bit boring, but playing a couple hours a day, even with the somewhat repetitive game loop, it still was a fun game loop that I enjoyed doing. I don't like to assign number scores, but I think I'm sitting slightly below the critical consensus on this one. It's a real solid game. It just needed to do more to make it fresh, rather than play it so safe. And yeah, I would definitely recommend it if you enjoyed the first couple Spider-Man games, and if you enjoyed the Arkham games. It's still kind of a good chapter in that timeline, and I look forward to what Insomniac does next with Wolverine and Spider-Man 3.